Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Travis Mitchell, and I'm the mayor of the city of Kyle. And I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. This is the second virtual open house that we have hosted. We have 3 more events after tonight, each with the same presentation to provide opportunities for every Kyle resident to get more information about Prop A, as well as to get questions answered quickly and effectively. So with that said, before we get started, I want to allow Patty Hickson and Elmer Guardado from our Bond Communications team to go over a few Zoom webinar features, including how to access Spanish interpretation for tonight's presentation. And then we'll get into the details of the proposed bond. Thank you for joining us.
Well, great, and thank you, Mayor Mitchell. My name is Patty Hickson, and I just wanted to go over a few features of the Zoom webinar for those who may not be familiar. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted online at cityofkyle.com/bond. It is also being live streamed to the city's Facebook and YouTube accounts. Audio and video will be limited to our speakers. Your microphone and camera are and will remain off throughout the presentation, so don't worry, we can't see or hear you right now. We encourage you to participate by leaving questions and feedback in the Q&A feature. You can access the Q&A feature in Zoom by hovering your mouse over the bottom of the screen and clicking on the Q&A icon. Please note, we will be monitoring the Zoom chat for questions, but if you would like to have your question answered out loud at the end of the presentation, please leave it in the Q&A feature. For those watching on Facebook, you can ask questions in the comment section, and a team member from the city will share those here on Zoom so they can be answered as well. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation. In addition to Mayor Mitchell, we also have City Manager Sellers as well as Captain Hernandez available on tonight's webinar to help answer your questions about Proposition A. Just a few other quick things to note. If you're having trouble seeing the presentation as well as the speaker, we recommend exiting out of full screen. We're also offering Spanish interpretation for those tuning in on Zoom this evening. My colleague Elmer will explain how to access that feature.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Elmer Guardado. Gracias por acompañarnos esta noche en el primer evento informativo sobre el Centro de Seguridad Pública. El audio y el video se limitarán a nuestros presentadores y su micrófono y cámara estarán apagados durante toda la presentación. Le recomendamos que participe dejando preguntas y comentarios en la función de preguntas y respuestas. Si tiene problemas viendo la presentación o el orador, le recomendamos que salga de la pantalla completa. Haga clic en el boletín de interpretación, el icono del mundo, en la barrera de herramientas si desea utilizar la función de interpretación en español en vivo. Gracias.
Thank you, Elmer. And with that, we'll turn it back over to Mayor Mitchell for our presentation.
Thank you, Patty. Allow me to start by saying that I am not here to advocate for or against the bond. State law is very clear that the governing officials who put forward a bond must remain neutral, and so that is certainly my intent tonight. With that said, I am here to provide any answers that I can to any of the residents in the community who would like to ask. The City of Kyle is committed to service, community, and innovation, and I am very excited about bringing this virtual town hall to the community. So we would like to know more about who is joining us tonight. So with that said, you'll see a poll pop up on your screen now. So please take 30 seconds to provide feedback. How long have you lived in Kyle? Okay, great. Thank you. Looks like we have some Kyle residents here tonight. Thank you again for joining us. We'd like to also know how you heard about tonight's meeting. So now another pop-up will come up saying, asking how long or how did you hear about tonight's open house? All right. Thank you very much. Looks like a variety of places. That's great. All right. So back to the reason that you are all here tonight. We want to share more information about Proposition A and the public safety needs of our growing population. We are a growing city, and as the community grows, our public safety needs grow too. And I'm going to play a quick video that talks a little more about where we are.
Did you know that the City of Kyle population has grown from about 6,000 residents to more than 52,000 residents in the last 20 years? And did you know that the Kyle Police Department is currently understaffed and spread thin across 3 different facilities, including an old bank building with officers working out of bank vaults? This was always intended to be a temporary solution. In fact, efforts to house the Kyle PD in a single location date back to 2011. As our community grows, our public safety needs grow too. That's why Kyle City Council has called for Proposition A, a $37 million bond election to fund a new public safety center. If voters pass Proposition A on Tuesday, November 3rd, the city would be able to finance the design and construction of a new public safety center to serve residents for the next 20 years. This project could begin construction in spring 2021 and be completed in roughly 14 months. It's important to note that in light of COVID-19, the city would also be deferring the tax rate impact, meaning residents wouldn't see the estimated $13 a month increase until October 2021. A new public safety center would have dedicated space to expand police department services and potentially improve emergency response times, pursue accreditation, and increase officer training. Fully staff the department with additional mental health professionals, trauma support services, a K-9 unit, and additional sworn officers. Expand community engagement programs. And build out an emergency operations center where the city could collaborate with surrounding authorities during critical times, such as natural disasters, community-wide security threats, or even pandemics like COVID-19. This public safety center is an investment in our community. To learn more about Proposition A or how a new public safety center will help address the safety needs of our growing population, visit cityofkyle.com/bond.
All right. Well, as you can see, the need for a new public safety facility has existed for a long time. And while the unprecedented situation with COVID-19 has impacted everyone in Kyle and beyond, it has also reinforced the need for a dedicated space for the city to provide public safety services to our residents. Initial discussions for the need for a new public safety facility date all the way back to 2011, when a needs assessment for the Kyle Police Department was first conducted by Brinkley Sargent architects. And then a follow-up study was conducted by Brinkley Sargent in 2019 which updated the projected facility needs for the police department by 2029 and 2039. These studies looked only at facility requirements for the police department and did not take into account additional square footage to establish an emergency operations center or any space required to support the additional public safety services provided by the city. In addition to the police department needs analysis, we heard from the community that public safety needs were an important concern through our Future of Kyle 2020 community survey that was conducted earlier this year. Well, one of the things we heard was that the construction of a police safety facility was one of the top priorities for respondents in the next budget year. We also heard that over 90% of respondents agreed that traffic law enforcement is extremely or somewhat important. And finally, 98% of respondents believe that crime prevention and deterrence is extremely or somewhat important. With all of the data collected about Kyle's growing public safety needs going back to 2011, City Council voted to call a $37 million bond election on Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020, which seeks voter approval for Proposition A to finance the construction of a public safety center that will support our growing community. It's important to note that in light of COVID-19, the city would be deferring the tax rate impact until October 2021 as part of the city's fiscal year 2022 budget, meaning that if passed, community members wouldn't see this potential property tax rate increase for more than a year. And as part of the planning that took place before calling the bond election on August 17th, the city formed a task force in 2018 to officially begin the process of researching and designing a public safety center for consideration of bond funding. The task force is made up of representatives from the city, the police department, and the community. This task force, after extensive research of facilities and other municipalities, identified the police station headquarters in College Station, shown here, and New Braunfels as an ideal model for Kyle's proposed public safety center. Both facilities were designed by the architectural firm PGAL, and in early 2020, City Council approved funding for a contract with PGAL to begin customizing an existing design for the proposed public safety center. Using the existing facility design provided the city with an opportunity to expedite the design process, and if passed by voters in November, the design would be finalized and constructed beginning in the spring of 2021. The city anticipates a 14-month timeline for construction of the Public Safety Center, which would open in 2022. Okay, so you've been hearing the words Public Safety Center a lot this evening, and that kind of begs the question, what specifically does that mean? The Kyle Public Safety Center would be a facility dedicated to serving the public safety needs of our community. In an effort to avoid another temporary facility for the police department, the proposed 64,000 square foot, 2-story building would provide space to fully staff the police department in a single location with room to grow over the next 20 years. Our public safety needs go beyond the police department, however, which I'll talk more about in just a moment. But let me start off by talking through what the proposed facility would include for our police department. First, the proposed Public Safety Center would be located on Marketplace Avenue at Kohler's Crossing in the Uptown development or near it. The location is marked on this slide and is where you can see the red star. So right next to RSI, also where there's a new facility going up for E&F Technologies. It's the big white construction building there. Eventually, Marketplace is going to connect south from that particular intersection all the way down to where HEB is. Compared to the current headquarters, the proposed location would increase access across the city with the potential for more efficient response times by removing the immediate proximity to the train tracks and offering access to East Kyle via 1626 and South and North Kyle via I-35. Additionally, the 6-acre site would be donated to the city by the developers in Plum Creek, which equates to more than $700,000 in land savings for the taxpayers. Okay, so as I previously mentioned, the Kyle Police Department is currently understaffed, and as our population grows, that gap continues to grow, or at the very least, we're trying to prevent ourselves from getting further behind. The proposed Public Safety Center would allow the city to fully staff the police department at a recommended ratio of 1.5 officers per 1,000 residents, as compared to our current ratio, which is just barely over 1 officer to 1,000 residents. And specifically, there would be a space to bring in more community engagement staff, as well as additional mental health and trauma support specialists. In light of COVID-19, the desire and need to be able to create the space for mental health officers has certainly been something that I've noticed that we need to be investing in more. And in the proposed Public Safety Center, there would be an investigation suite that offers additional privacy and can accommodate victims or residents experiencing trauma as a result of crime. Okay, so in the current headquarters, the evidence room is nearly full. And however, the police department is legally required to store certain evidence for decades. And the space needed only grows with our growing population. As you can imagine, with the rate of growth that we have had, with the amount of evidence, the amount of years that evidence has to be stored, the actual rate of need is growing exponentially too. So there would, in the current headquarters, there would be additional space to store and protect evidence, as well as an in-house crime and evidence lab in the proposed public safety center. The facility would also allow the Kyle Police Department to pursue accreditation from the Law Enforcement Recognition Program through the Texas Police Chiefs Association, as well as the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, which opens up opportunities for the Kyle Police Department to pursue various grants that could further improve recruitment, training, and public safety services for the community. Accreditation from the CALEA provides greater accountability within the agency and increases community advocacy through a set of standards that clearly define authority, performance, and responsibilities. The proposed Public Safety Center would also provide dedicated space to expand community-based programs like the Citizens Police Academy and Citizens on Patrol, which is a new group that we have put together under the oversight of some of our veteran officers, and they have been doing some incredible volunteer work in the community. And that will connect the police department, obviously, by allowing for those dedicated spaces to the community in more efficient and available ways. The city would also be able to offer new programs and services for residents that the current police headquarters cannot support, such as the Youth Explorer program and Neighborhood Watch program meetings. So, as I mentioned before, our public safety needs go beyond the police department, and the proposed facility would provide dedicated space for the city to establish an emergency operations center. An emergency operations center, or an EOC, would allow for better collaboration between the city of Kyle and surrounding counties and authorities during critical times. EOCs establish a central command center for all public safety services, police, fire, EMS, and local leadership to collect and analyze data and make strategic and operational decisions to protect the community during emergencies. Emergencies often addressed in an EOC included, but are not limited to, weather-related natural disasters, community-wide security threats such as school shootings or hostage situations, major traffic accidents on I-35, or even pandemics like COVID-19. I would just add personally here that the need for an emergency operations center was felt in the spring. We did not have the kind of gathering place that we needed to be able to do some of the things that we needed. And so there was a lot of makeshift offices. An emergency operations center would have been extremely helpful during the early days of COVID-19 when we were declaring emergencies. So with that said, in addition to establishing an EOC and providing room for the police department to grow over the next 20 years, the Public Safety Center would also provide immediate temporary space for ancillary public safety functions, including IT, communications, and city administration until the police department requires the full building. The proposed bond, Proposition A, is estimated to cost approximately $37 million. If passed, the city anticipates raising the property tax rate by an estimated 7 cents per $100,000 of valuation during the 20-year life cycle of the general obligation bonds. That means that the average property owner with a $216,000 home within the city of Kyle would see their property taxes increase approximately $13.50 per month, or about $160.50 per year. As a reminder, in light of COVID-19, the city would be deferring the tax rate impact until October 2021. Okay, so when you go to the polls, you'll see this official language on the ballot. What this ballot language means is that if passed, the funding from the proposed bond would finance the design, construction, and equipping of a public safety center that would open in 2022 and serve residents for decades to come. This bond is an investment in our community. Here are a few important dates to remember. Election Day is Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020. Early voting takes place from October 13 to 30th. The last day to register to vote is October 5th. To register or apply for a ballot by mail, visit the Hays County Government Center or an elections office online. You can also find all polling locations and hours on our website at cityofkyle.com/bond. And on the screen, we have a slide with information about additional open houses that we are hosting. We hope that you'll encourage your neighbors to attend any of the following events or watch a recording. And on this slide, you can see the link for our bond webpage, cityofkyle.com/bond, as well as the bond hotline phone number and email. Please reach out to our team with any questions or feedback. So with that said, and before we move to the Q&A portion, I want to emphasize that the proposed bond package for a public safety center, Proposition A, reflects the city's commitment to the proper and efficient progress of Kyle, which is part of our city charter. The proposed facility would allow the city to increase its public safety services to support our growing population, and it is, in fact, an investment in our community. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this event. With that, we will now begin the Q&A portion. As Patty mentioned earlier, you can leave questions or comments in the Q&A feature of the webinar, and we will each read out these questions and give our responses. If a question is repeated, we will acknowledge that it has already been answered.
All right, well, thank you, Mayor Mitchell. We do have a number of questions that are coming in. So I'll start off with one from attendee Kale. He asks if you could talk a little bit more about the Emergency Operations Center and specifically how it would help the city collaborate with surrounding counties. What would that look like?
Well, an emergency operations center is designed to be a gathering place. So it depends on what the situation is. So I was on the city council in 2016 when we had a pretty significant flood event. And so when flood events happen, you can imagine that there are cars being swept all over the roads, potentially in all kinds of spots. We're having to rush to close down gates, possibility of manhole covers coming off in streets with water coming up. Flooding is terrible, and it requires a very specific type of response. So we could have the county sheriff's department showing up. You would have a lot of public works department heads and team members that are that specialize in SCADA repairs and various other types of technical expertise, so that those folks can all deploy in an efficient manner. Because if a manhole cover pops and the public works department finds out about it, maybe they are going to go respond, but they need to be coordinating with the police department as well to get on scene fast. And then obviously, you could just go on and on with the types of coordination that are required in an emergency. And when the emergency hits, you need that space set up and ready to go, because it doesn't wait for you to say, well, we need to figure out how we're going to get this thing started. The emergency happens normally very fast.
All right, thank you. We have a couple of questions about the proposed tax rate impact. One actually coming in from Facebook. The quoted approximate $13 per month, is that an estimate or a minimum? And specifically, could that go up if a person's property value increases? City Manager Sellers, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you. I think that the question is about mill rates, and this $13 is actually an average based on the property tax valuation. The increase is proposed at 0.0744 cents. All right, so calculate that to mills, but that amount will be the same throughout the life of the bond.
All right, great. And then another question for you, City Manager. One attendee asks, Peter Parcher asks, will additional funds be brought in from additional homes or businesses? How might that potentially lessen the time or interest costs over the 20 years of the proposed bonds?
Great, thank you. Another good question. You know, there are a variety of factors that may impact the amount the city pays toward that bond. Again, it's a 20-year estimate, and the bond sale will occur in roughly May or June of next year. So some of those factors could be, you know, tax-exempt bond market conditions and interest rates at the time of the sale, the city's credit rating at the time of the sale, the final bond size or total amount of bonds to be issued at the time of sale. To answer specifically this question, the real property valuations in Kyle at the time of the sale, economic conditions for the city as a whole at the time of sale, and future direction from council. So it's important to note that the bonds will be sold as 20-year bonds. They become what's called callable or able to be retired or refinanced early at about the 10-year mark. So depending on the city's growth, the city's total assessed valuation, in 10 years, the city council will take a look at that and determine how those bonds could be called or at least refinanced early.
All right, great. Thank you so much for that. We have a couple of questions related to the proposed facility and what it might offer. Again, coming in from Peter Parcher. Specifically, the questions are, will there be secure parking areas for police vehicles and a maintenance bay for vehicles? And then also, would there be holding cells or a jail in the new building? And Mayor Mitchell, I'll kick it over to you to maybe kick that off, but I know Captain Hernandez might have some thoughts on that as well. But Mayor, why don't you start and share a little bit more about what that proposed facility could include?
It does not have jail cells, but it would have secure parking. So there would be at the front, there would be public parking, and then there would be a gated area where authorized personnel would be allowed to go back into the back. There would be pretty much everything the police department needs at the new facility. So maintenance bays, there'd be a place for folks to shower and change, which we don't currently have. A place for our officers to exercise. A breakout room that is the appropriate size for our department instead of the closet that they currently are in. And then multiple meeting rooms, because one thing I have learned over the last 4.5 years is that a police department has lots of meetings, and not just internal meetings, but meetings with community, and they need to be able to move around and meet. And our facility does not allow for that. We have essentially just one space. And it stays very, very filled. So all of those types of things are going to be in the new facility. What we wanted to make sure that we did when we designed it was make it last. A public safety center that we could be proud of, and one that would stand the test of time. Because what we don't want to have happen is for this facility to have the same result on our department as what previous decisions have. So The reason we talk about going back to 2011 is because that's really when the city's growth started to be experienced in a negative way on our police department, and the strain of trying to keep up with a growing population began to be felt. And at the time, there just was not a financial resource in order to build a new facility. And honestly, it might not have even made sense to do back then because the department kind of needed to build a certain critical mass, and then we would be able to put them in a final home. But 2011 came, then 2014 came, where we went from one building to the next, an old post office, a meeting hall, and then finally to an old bank building. It creates a type of environment that's not necessarily great for our officers. And so what we are hoping to accomplish with this particular design is to make sure that if the voters are voting yes, and if they choose to vote yes, that when they make that vote, they know that the proposal underneath it is taking all of the future considerations of the department into account.
All right, great. Well, and specifically, a couple of questions related to bond funding for this facility. The first is, what roadworks, water, or wastewater infrastructure, if any, would be constructed with the funds from this bond? City Manager Sellers, could you speak to that?
Sure, happy to. So this property is internal to a site that has the external utilities that are already available, which we call a shovel-ready site. So the bond funds would go to on-site activity, meaning building, parking lot, landscaping, etc. No portion of the bond is anticipated to pay for any exterior roadways, water, or wastewater to arrive to the site, just internal.
Okay, great. And then within that same question, attendee Peter Parcher had asked as well, will this building be strictly for Kyle Police Department now and into the future? Mayor, would you like to talk a little bit about the use of the proposed facility?
Sure. It's a public safety center. So the design purpose of the facility is to promote the police department, and that includes the core function of the police department, and it can include ancillary functions as well, which is why we have said that IT, communications, and certain administrative functions that really can be housed in either area will go to the new police department. But that being said, those ancillary functions are last in, first out, meaning the design is such that as the police department grows, they will have the space to eventually absorb the entire 64,000 square feet. By that, that's a 20-year plus horizon in order for that to happen. So while the police department is growing, there are certain departments that frankly don't have a home right now anyway, will be able to go in there with the police department. And then the final thing I would say to keep in mind is that the facility that's being proposed is being proposed with square footage that is in addition to the Brinkley Sargent report, which says that the police department's needs are about 44,000 square feet as defined internally. And so we were able to get the police department's the footprint from College Station and New Braunfels for significantly less money than was originally spent on those plans. And we were able to get the land for free without having to have a lot of infrastructure costs. So it set us up really well to be able to make sure that all the proceeds from the bond will go directly into the construction of the overall facility.
All right, great, thank you. Well, we have another question from Sylvia Diaz asking, information that's been shared about the proposed public safety center indicates that mental health services and trauma support would be included or could be expanded through this facility. Do you know yet what mental services that might be? And then also, are there any currently any mental health support for calls related to mental issues in this county? Captain Hernandez, would you maybe be able to talk a little bit about what it looks like when the police department receives a call related to mental health services?
Thank you, Patty. Our department receives numerous mental health calls, and our staff, our police officers, we have numerous officers that are certified mental health officers, but we have not been able to dedicate one specific mental health officer. We do have one position available, and because of staffing, we have not been able to fill that. We have currently interviewed and selected one of our officers to fill that spot. What that will allow is not only the officers on the street will be trained to handle those calls, but the mental health officer can do home visits and follow-up visits and be a little bit more proactive meeting with these mental health clients. And a facility that has the proper space to meet with them is really important for privacy and safety of the mental health clients. As far as the crime victims, the same thing. Currently, the Crime Victim Services Coordinator does not have a private, safe, secure location where they can meet with victims of violence, especially family violence, where there may be minors involved as well. A new facility would provide that space that is desperately needed.
All right, thank you, Captain Hernandez. We have another question from Peter Percher. What will happen to the buildings currently occupied by the Kyle Police Department if this bond were to pass and the new proposed public safety center were to be built? Mayor Metro, would you be able to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. The answer is, frankly, we don't know. We're waiting to see what the direction of the voters is. And the migration process from our dispatch and our evidence and our current facility is going to take some time. So we're talking about a 14 to probably 2-year horizon for when between when our current police department begins its move and actually gets set up in the new facilities. And over those 2 years, once the bond is passed, we will certainly be the staff and council will be putting our heads together to try to figure out what the best use of those facilities is. The facilities are not in good shape at all. So it'll be some difficult decisions that we'll have to make.
Okay, well, thank you. We've got another question coming in from Facebook asking if funding from this bond would strictly be for capital, or would it also fund new officers and their equipment? City Manager Sellers, might you be able to talk a little bit about how the bond funding could be used?
Absolutely. So there's two components to a municipal budget, the interest and sinking, which is the debt service piece, and then the operations and maintenance, which is the ongoing funding of salaries and equipment, et cetera. The bond proceeds would fall squarely into the interest and sinking portion of the budget, meaning it really goes for capital. Beyond that, the city would continue the O&M, the operation and the maintenance portion, out of the general fund budget.
Right, thank you. And City Manager Sellers, I don't know if you could speak to this at all, but there's been a couple of questions related to what those maintenance and operation costs of the building would be. Has that been projected at all?
You know, the building as a new facility, of course, we're planning on building it with low impact development. We're planning on implementing as many LEED certified elements as we can to keep that ongoing O&M cost to a minimum for the facility itself. We don't have a calculated impact of what that will cost annually, but our expectation is it should be nominal.
Thank you for that. We've got another question from Peter Percher asking, should this bond proposal not pass, what plans are in place to deal with the Kyle Police Department's needs? Mayor, could you talk a little bit more about that?
There are no plans in place as of right now. What we have been working on for the last 2 years is preparing to construct this facility. If you go back 12 months ago, or even back to 2018, We went through a very exhaustive needs assessment, and that also included a facility needs assessment. And there were lots of different options back then for the council to consider to help the police department expand. And ultimately, the task force and the council elected to pursue a bond. We had the option at that time of issuing a CO bond versus a GO bond, meaning that if we had chosen to just issue the debt and build a police station, we could have done that. But we felt like this facility really was a community investment that the community needed to have a say in whether or not to make. We have never proposed in the history of the city of Kyle a general obligation bond to construct a facility to the voters. City Hall, the fire department, and all of the current facilities were, the debts were issued through CO bonds, which means that just a majority of vote of council was required. So this is us really trying to put out a proposal that we think that we've done the due diligence to bring forward with a lot of responsibility. This is not just on a random piece of land. It's on a strategic piece of land that the police department supports, and that it also is very well situated and free. The construction of this facility is proposed to really solve a lot of those administrative problems that our police department has in delivering the value to the residents that I know they're trying to deliver. And if the bond fails, then the council at that time will have to sort of reassess where do we go from here. It's possible that some of those other options that were proposed in the Brinkley Sargent report could come back to life at that point in time. I don't know. We'll have to just see what happens.
Okay. Well, and there's another question from attendee Kale asking, if the bond doesn't pass, could residents still vote on a bond regarding just a police department? Mayor, could you speak a little bit about, I know you mentioned in the presentation some legal restrictions around calling another bond for 3 years?
No, the answer is when you issue a bond for a police department, which is what this is, a public safety center is another word for a police department. The voters get to decide, and if the voters say no, the council's prohibited from bringing another proposition for 3 years per state law. So whatever we did, it would to move forward, it would require the council to take action without bringing it back to the voters. And it would take up to 3 years before we would be able to proposition for a new facility again.
Okay, great. Well, and you touched on this a little bit in the previous question's answer, but we did specifically get a question from Peter Percher related to why is the building being built on this particular piece of land instead of closer to I-35? Can you talk a bit more about how this property was selected and how the donation from the developer of Plum Creek came together?
Sure. The police department and the council and senior leadership have been engaged in a conversation over the last couple of years about where the ideal version was. We discussed at length, the council did, through these workshops about downtown. We discussed a model that where it's might be more of a substation type model to try to break up the department, but there are a lot of downsides to that. There were places mentioned like, it'd be kind of neat to be close to like the Kyle Flea Market, right there on I-35 in that central Kyle area. The challenge with that was that it would have added a significant amount of cost to the project, and there wasn't any land for sale that really fit the needs. So you have to figure out a specific piece of land that has a lot of public safety elements to it that needs to have the multiple entrances, multiple exits. You need the ability to quickly go north, south, east, and west. When we started putting all those factors together, it started kind of narrowing it down to just a few particular areas. And the particular site next to RSI was very attractive for us because we wanted to establish a sort of a civic center there where our police department can go down Marketplace Avenue straight south to HEB, and then all the way south to Burleson without having to go through very many stops. So that's the new Marketplace Avenue that's going to be built over the next couple years. And then going east, there's a railroad crossing on Kohlers, but I don't know how many years ago, it's been 3 years ago now, we received grant funding from Campo, which is a regional group that takes and allocates state dollars to local and regional jurisdictions for major capital improvements. And we lobbied for and successfully were able to get funding for grade separation on Kohlers, which means that going east from and crossing the tracks from that particular site, or going west, I should say, and crossing the tracks from that particular site, you would actually go underneath or over. I think it's underneath is what is going to be finally built. Scott can correct me there if it's not underneath, but the point over, it changed. So we'll be able to go over right there on Kohlers. So there'll be no train tracks is the point I'm trying to make for the police department to get basically very quickly to any part of the city.
All right, great. Well, we have time for one more question. We want to make sure that we wrap up by 8 p.m. and we also have a couple of exit survey questions for attendees. So the final question I'll share is from the Rocha residents. What is the current personnel operating police operations from existing facilities, officers patrolling emergency communications, etc.? If the bond does not pass, how would that impact accreditation or impact of training and accountability of existing operations? Captain Hernandez, could you speak a little bit about how this bond passing in this particular public safety facility, if approved by voters, how it would impact the police department?
Well, first of all, on the accreditation process, we've already preliminary studied our current facilities and the operations, and they would not meet the standards. They would nowhere meet the standards that are needed for accreditation. And so a new facility would provide the appropriate type of facility for a police department pertaining to evidence and to security, and that would help us achieve that accreditation. As far as personnel and training, you know, right now we have, the mayor mentioned earlier, we have one room that is utilized by numerous groups. So training is restricted to, we can't host training like other agencies do. And if we had the room to host a training, that also offers our police department free slots in certain trainings that we host. So that would help on the training side. And what was the third part of that? Was there a third part of that?
Let me pull that back up. It was the training as well as accountability, which I think ties into some of that accreditation.
The accreditation, right. So yeah, the accreditation is the standard, and obviously would hold the police department more accountable, and we would be held accountable to maintain those standards.
All right, well, thank you for that. Well, that wraps up the Q&A in terms of just making sure that we stay on time. So I know that one of the questions asked if there would be the ability to post the questions and the answers that have been shared tonight on the bond website. We certainly have the frequently asked questions on the website, and we are updating those on a regular basis. So certainly be sure to check back on that bond website for more. Well, thank you again. We really appreciate your input, and thank you for joining us this evening. Have a great night.